The train wheezed to a halt at Copper Ridge Station with a final shudder of steam and grinding metal. Through the grimy window of the last passenger car, Katherine Miller pressed her palm against the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she stared at the barren platform. The Colorado Territory stretched endlessly beyond the depot, all rust-colored earth and jagged peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky. Her chest burned with each shallow breath, the persistent cough that had plagued her for weeks threatening to tear loose again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conductor's voice boomed through the car, announcing their arrival in a tone that suggested this was the end of the line in more ways than one. Kate pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to ward off the chill that seemed to live in her bones now. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she shifted, the carefully penned words of Samuel Crawford promising a new life, a fresh start, a chance at happiness she'd never known back in the crowded tenements of Boston. Her hands trembled as she gathered her single carpet bag, the weight of it nearly too much for her weakened arms. The other passengers had already disembarked, their boots echoing on the wooden platform outside. She was alone in the car now, just as she'd been alone for most of the 3-day journey west. The porter appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to concern as he took in her pale complexion and the dark circles beneath her eyes. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the depot platform as Kate stepped from the train, her legs unsteady beneath her. The thin mountain air made her lungs work harder than they should, each breath a conscious effort that left her lightheaded. She scanned the handful of people waiting on the platform, searching for the face she'd memorized from the single photograph Samuel had sent. A tall man with kind eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, he'd written, though the sepia image had revealed little beyond a serious expression and work-worn hands. The platform began to empty as families reunited and travelers claimed their destinations, but no one approached her. Kate stood beside her carpet bag, the weight of uncertainty settling over her like a heavy blanket. The train gave a final whistle and lurched into motion, carrying away her last connection to the life she'd left behind. As the cars disappeared around a bend in the track, she realized she was truly alone in this vast, unforgiving landscape. A man emerged from the depot building, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he approached. He wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his bearing suggesting authority, or at least familiarity with taking charge of situations. His eyes settled on Kate with a mixture of recognition and growing alarm. "You'd be Miss Miller, I expect," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm James Whitmore. Samuel Crawford asked me to meet the afternoon train." His voice trailed off as he took in her appearance more fully, the way she swayed slightly on her feet, the flush of fever that painted her cheeks despite the pallor underneath. Kate nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The cough that had been building in her chest finally broke free, racking her thin frame with violent spasms that left her gasping. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, trying to muffle the sound, but when she pulled it away, dark spots stained the white fabric. Whitmore's expression darkened with concern and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. He glanced around the platform as if hoping someone else might materialize to handle this unexpected complication. When his gaze returned to Kate, she saw the decision forming in his eyes before he spoke. "Miss Miller, I'm afraid I have some difficult news," he began, his voice gentler now but still carrying the weight of reluctance. "Samuel Crawford passed on 2 weeks ago. Horse threw him out by the north pasture, broke his neck clean through. We buried him up on the hill overlooking his homestead, figured that's where he'd want to rest." The words hit Kate like a physical blow, though some part of her had been expecting them from the moment no one had stepped forward to claim her. She'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. That life had a way of snatching away anything good just when it seemed within reach. Still, the finality of it, the sudden collapse of the future she dared to imagine, left her reeling. "I see," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for telling me." She bent to pick up her carpet bag, the movement sending another wave of dizziness through her head. "I suppose I'll need to arrange passage back to Boston then." Whitmore shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, his hat turning in his hands like a prayer wheel. "About that, Miss Miller. Next eastbound train doesn't come through for another week, and the stage only runs twice a month. You're sort of stranded here until then, I'm afraid." Kate closed her eyes, feeling the last of her carefully hoarded strength drain away. She had enough money for a return ticket, barely, but not enough for a week's lodging and meals. The consumptive cough had cost her the seamstress job that had been her livelihood, and the doctor's bills had taken what little savings she'd managed to accumulate. Coming west had been an act of desperation disguised as hope, and now even that had crumbled to dust. "There's a boarding house in town," Whitmore continued, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of the solution. "Mrs. Patterson takes in travelers sometimes, though she's particular about her guests." His eyes lingered on Kate's pallor, on the way she held herself as if every breath might be her last. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation, drawing both their attention to the dusty road that led into town. A single rider approached at an easy gallop, his horse's coat gleaming with sweat in the afternoon heat. As he drew closer, Kate could make out a tall figure in worn denim and a faded cotton shirt, a black medical bag secured behind his saddle. Dr. Thomas Bennett had been making his rounds when he'd seen the train smoke in the distance, and something had compelled him to ride toward the depot. Perhaps it was the restless feeling that had been plaguing him all day, or maybe just the doctor's instinct that told him he might be needed. Now, as he took in the scene before him, that instinct proved itself correct. The woman standing beside James Whitmore was clearly ill, her posture speaking of exhaustion and pain even from a distance. Her dark hair had escaped its pins during the journey, framing a face that might have been beautiful if not for the telltale signs of consumption that marked her features. She held herself with a dignity that impressed him, despite her obvious distress. Tom swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the platform with a soft thud. He'd known Samuel Crawford well enough, had even attended the man's funeral, so he could guess at the situation developing here. "James," he said by way of greeting, though his attention remained focused on the woman who seemed to be swaying on her feet. "Tom, thank goodness you're here," Whitmore replied, relief evident in his voice. "This is Miss Katherine Miller. She was supposed to marry Samuel." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Came all the way from Boston, and now I don't rightly know what to do with her." Tom stepped closer, his trained eye cataloging symptoms with the automatic precision of years spent, treating everything from bullet wounds to birthing complications. The woman's breathing was labored and shallow. Her skin had the waxy pallor of advanced tuberculosis, and the way she held her handkerchief suggested she'd been coughing blood. She was seriously ill, possibly dying, and certainly in no condition to be standing in the brutal Colorado sun. "Miss Miller," he said softly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm Dr. Bennett. I think you need to sit down before you fall down." Kate looked up at him with eyes that were fever-bright but still sharp with intelligence. She saw a man probably in his mid-30s, with sun-weathered skin and gentle brown eyes that held no judgment, only professional concern. His dark hair was slightly mussed from his ride, and dust coated his clothes, but there was something reassuring about his solid presence. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she began, then immediately contradicted herself by swaying dangerously. Tom reached out instinctively to steady her, his strong hands gentle as they guided her to a wooden bench beside the depot building. "When "Did you last eat?" he asked, kneeling beside the bench to bring himself to her eye level. It was a doctor's trick he'd learned long ago, making himself less imposing when dealing with frightened or vulnerable patients. Kate tried to remember, but the days of travel had blurred together in a haze of discomfort and worry. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before." Her voice was barely audible, and speaking seemed to require tremendous effort. Tom exchanged a look with Whitmore, a silent communication that spoke of shared concern and the weight of responsibility neither man had asked for. The afternoon was growing late, and the temperature would drop quickly once the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The woman needed medical attention, food, and rest, in that order. "James, would you mind fetching my horse some water?" Tom asked, though it was clearly a polite way of requesting privacy. Whitmore nodded and hurried off toward the depot's water trough, leaving Tom alone with his unexpected patient. "Miss Miller, I'm going to speak plainly because I think you deserve honesty," Tom began, settling back on his heels. "You're very sick and you need immediate medical attention. I have a clinic at my ranch just outside town, and I'd like to take you there so I can properly examine you and get some food into you." Kate's first instinct was to refuse. She'd spent too many years learning to be self-sufficient, to never rely on the kindness of strangers that so often came with strings attached. But the rational part of her mind, the part that wasn't clouded by fever and exhaustion, recognized that she had few options left. "I can't pay you," she said quietly, the admission burning her throat almost as much as the persistent cough. "I have just enough money for a train ticket back east, assuming I live long enough to use it." Tom's expression didn't change, and he didn't immediately respond with the reassurances she expected. Instead, he seemed to be considering something, weighing options in the careful way of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Miss Miller, can I ask you something?" he said finally. "When you agreed to come west to marry Samuel Crawford, what were you hoping to find here?" The question caught her off guard, its personal nature surprising coming from a virtual stranger. But there was something in his tone, a genuine curiosity rather than idle nosiness, that made her consider answering honestly. "A chance to matter to someone," she said after a long moment. "A place where I could be useful instead of just another mouth to feed or body taking up space." Samuel's letters made it sound like he needed someone, like I might actually be important to his life. Tom nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his expression. "Those are good reasons," he said simply. "And they don't have to die with Samuel Crawford." Before Kate could ask what he meant, another violent coughing fit seized her, this one worse than any before. Tom immediately moved to support her, one hand steady on her back as her body convulsed with the effort of expelling the fluid from her lungs. When it finally subsided, the handkerchief in her hand was bright with fresh blood. "That settles it," Tom said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of a physician who would brook no argument. "You're coming with me right now, and we'll worry about everything else later." He stood and called for Whitmore, who hurried back with obvious relief at having something to do. Within minutes, they had Kate's carpetbag secured and the woman herself carefully lifted onto Tom's horse, her slight weight settling against his chest as he took the reins. "Tell Mrs. Patterson I'll send word about arrangements," Tom called over his shoulder as they prepared to leave. "And James, not a word about this to anyone else just yet. The lady deserves some privacy while she recovers." As they rode away from the depot, Kate felt the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of the man behind her, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she might live to see another sunrise after all. Part 2. The Journey to Understanding. The ride to Dr. Bennett's ranch passed in a blur of pain and disorientation for Kate. She found herself leaning heavily against his solid chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat somehow more comforting than the horse's gait beneath them. The landscape rolled past in waves of golden grass and scattered pine, but she barely registered the beauty of it through the haze of fever that seemed to wrap around her thoughts like cotton wool. Tom guided his mare along a well-worn path that wound through a series of low hills, taking care to avoid the rougher terrain that might jar his fragile passenger. He could feel the heat radiating from her body, even through the layers of fabric between them, and the way she occasionally shivered despite the warmth told him more about her condition than any formal examination might reveal. She was fighting a losing battle against the consumption, but there was something in the set of her shoulders, even in her weakened state, that suggested she wouldn't surrender easily. "Not much farther now," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the soft thud of hoofbeats on packed earth. Kate didn't respond, but he felt her nod slightly against his shoulder, and he took that as encouragement that she was still conscious and aware. The ranch house came into view as they crested the final hill, a modest structure of weathered timber and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape around it. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and lamplight glowed warmly in the windows, creating an impression of home that Kate hadn't experienced in longer than she cared to remember. To one side of the main house stood a smaller building that had clearly been converted from its original purpose, with large windows added to let in natural light and a painted sign that read simply medical practice. Tom's housekeeper, a sturdy woman named Maria Santos, who had worked for the previous owner and stayed on when Tom purchased the property, emerged from the kitchen as they approached. Her dark eyes took in the situation immediately, and without a word of explanation needed, she began clearing a path to the clinic and gathering supplies that might be required. "Signora is very sick," Maria observed in her accented English as Tom carefully dismounted and then reached up to help Kate down from the horse. It wasn't a question but a statement of fact delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize serious illness when it presented itself. "Very sick," Tom agreed, wrapping one arm around Kate's waist to support her as they made their way slowly toward the clinic. "We'll need hot water, clean linens, and some of that broth you made yesterday if there's any left." Kate tried to protest that she didn't want to be any trouble, but the words came out as little more than a whisper that neither of her companions seemed to hear. The short walk from the horse to the clinic building exhausted her remaining strength, and by the time Tom settled her onto the examination table, she was gasping for breath and struggling to remain upright. The clinic itself was surprisingly well equipped for such a remote location. Tom had invested heavily in modern medical equipment when he'd established his practice here, driven by memories of too many patients lost to treatable conditions simply because the right tools hadn't been available. Gas lamps provided bright, steady light, and glass-fronted cabinets held an impressive array of medicines and surgical instruments. It was the kind of setup more commonly found in city hospitals than frontier towns. "Miss Miller, I need to examine you properly now," Tom said, his voice taking on the professional tone he used with all his patients. "Maria will stay to assist and ensure your comfort. I'm going to listen to your lungs first, if that's acceptable to you." Kate nodded weakly, too tired to care much about propriety at this point. She had passed beyond the luxury of modesty. Somewhere around the second day of her journey west, when the coughing fits had become so violent that other passengers had begun avoiding her compartment entirely. Tom's stethoscope was cold against her back even through the fabric of her dress, but his touch was gentle and impersonal, the practiced movements of a physician focused entirely on diagnosis rather than anything else. What he heard through the instrument confirmed his worst fears. Kate's lungs were severely compromised, filled with fluid and showing signs of advanced tuberculosis that had progressed far beyond the early stages. The crackling sound that accompanied each labored breath told him that her body was losing the battle against the disease, and without immediate intervention, she might not survive another week. "How long have you been coughing up blood?" he asked, settling back on his stool and making notes in a leather-bound journal that served as his patient record book. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Kate replied, her voice barely audible. It started just after I lost my position at the dress shop. The owner said customers were complaining about the noise. Tom's jaw tightened slightly at this casual mention of the callousness Kate had endured, but he kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that displaying emotion during medical consultations rarely helped anyone, though privately he found himself angry at a world that would cast aside a sick woman simply for being inconvenient. Have you been eating regularly? Getting adequate rest? He continued, though he suspected he already knew the answers to these questions. Kate's laugh was bitter and ended in another coughing fit. Doctor, I've been living in a boarding house room that cost half my weekly wages, sharing it with 2 other women who worked nights and slept days. Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford, and food was whatever I could manage on what little money remained after paying rent. The picture that emerged from her answers was depressingly familiar to Tom. He had seen it countless times during his years practicing medicine in Denver before coming to Copper Ridge. The way poverty and illness created a vicious cycle that trapped people in situations from which escape seemed impossible. Kate had been dying slowly in Boston, ground down by circumstances beyond her control, and her decision to answer Samuel Crawford's advertisement had been less about romance than about simple survival. Miss Miller, I want you to understand your situation clearly, Tom said, leaning forward slightly so she wouldn't have to strain to hear him. You have advanced pulmonary tuberculosis, what most people call consumption. Without proper treatment, rest and nutrition, this disease will kill you, probably within the next few weeks. Kate met his gaze steadily, and he was struck by the lack of surprise in her expression. She had known, of course. Perhaps not the medical terminology, but she had understood that she was dying long before boarding the train that brought her west. However, Tom continued, with proper care, adequate nutrition, and complete rest, it's possible to halt the progression of the disease and even reverse some of the damage. It won't be easy, and it will require months of careful treatment, but I've seen patients recover from conditions as advanced as yours. I told you, doctor, I can't pay for treatment, Kate said, her voice stronger now that they were discussing practical matters rather than dwelling on her condition. I won't accept charity, and I won't become anyone's burden. Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape where the first stars were beginning to appear in the clear mountain sky. He had been thinking about this problem ever since lifting Kate onto his horse back at the depot, weighing options and considering possibilities that might work for both of them. Miss Miller, can I ask what skills you possess? What work experience you have? He said, turning back to face her. The question seemed to puzzle her, but she answered readily enough. I'm a seamstress by training, though I have done other work when necessary. I can cook, clean, manage household accounts, read and write well enough to handle correspondence. I worked briefly as a governess before the family discovered my condition and dismissed me. Tom nodded thoughtfully. I've been managing this ranch and clinic alone for 3 years now, with only Maria to help with the housework. I've been considering hiring someone to assist with the medical practice, someone who could handle correspondence, maintain patient records, help with basic nursing duties during examinations. The work wouldn't be overly strenuous, mostly sitting and writing, with occasional assistance when I need an extra pair of hands. Kate stared at him, clearly not understanding where he was leading with this line of conversation. I don't have any medical training, doctor. Medical training can be taught to someone with intelligence and a willingness to learn, Tom replied. What can't be taught is compassion, reliability, and the kind of inner strength that brings a woman halfway across the country to build a new life. You've already demonstrated all of those qualities. The implications of his suggestion began to dawn on Kate, and she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope if she dared to trust it. You're offering me employment? I'm offering you a position that would provide room and board in exchange for assistance with my medical practice, Tom clarified. The salary wouldn't be large, but it would be enough to cover your personal needs and perhaps allow you to save a small amount over time. More importantly, it would provide you with the rest and proper nutrition you need to recover your health. Kate was quiet for a long moment, studying his face for any sign of pity or condescension that would make accepting his offer impossible for her pride to bear. What she saw instead was simple pragmatism, a practical man offering a practical solution to a problem that benefited both parties involved. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked finally. Tom returned to his stool, clasping his hands in front of him as he considered how to answer her question honestly. "Because I understand what it's like to feel that the world has no place for you," he said quietly. "I understand what it means to need a second chance at building something meaningful with your life." Part 3. Echoes of Loss. The next morning brought crisp mountain air and golden sunlight streaming through the clinic windows, but Kate woke feeling worse than she had in days. The journey and emotional strain of the previous day had taken their toll, leaving her weak and disoriented as consciousness slowly returned. For several confused moments, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had come to be lying in a proper bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow beneath her head. Memory returned gradually, bringing with it the mixture of relief and uncertainty that had characterized her arrival in Copper Ridge. Dr. Bennett had insisted she spend the night in the small recovery room attached to his clinic rather than attempting to set up more permanent arrangements while she was still so unwell. Maria had brought her a simple nightgown and helped her wash and change, treating her with the kind matter-of-fact kindness that Kate had almost forgotten existed. Through the window, she could see Tom moving around the main yard of the ranch, checking on his small herd of cattle and performing the dozens of daily tasks that kept a working ranch functioning. Even at a distance, she could tell that he moved with the confident efficiency of a man comfortable with physical labor, despite his medical training and obvious education. It was an unusual combination, she reflected, a physician who was equally at home delivering babies and branding cattle. Maria appeared in the doorway carrying a breakfast tray that made Kate's stomach clench with sudden desperate hunger. It had been so long since she had seen food prepared with care and presented attractively that she had forgotten how appealing a proper meal could look. Steam rose from a bowl of oatmeal sweetened with honey and topped with fresh cream, accompanied by eggs cooked exactly right and thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. "El doctor says you must eat everything," Maria announced, setting the tray on the small table beside the bed. "He says your body needs strength to fight the sickness." Kate tried to protest that it was too much food, that she couldn't possibly eat such a large meal, but Maria fixed her with a stern look that brooked no argument. "You eat," she repeated firmly. "Is doctor's orders." The first few bites were difficult, her stomach having grown accustomed to the constant emptiness of the past several months. But as the warm, nourishing food began to settle, Kate found her appetite returning with surprising intensity. She ate slowly, savoring flavors that seemed impossibly rich after months of thin soup and stale bread, feeling strength begin to seep back into her exhausted body. Tom appeared in the doorway just as she was finishing the last of the eggs, his medical bag in one hand and a thick folder of papers in the other. "Good morning, Miss Miller. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you," Kate replied, and was surprised to realize that it was mostly true. The persistent ache in her chest remained, and she could feel the congestion that made each breath a conscious effort. But the desperate weakness that had characterized the previous day seemed to have receded slightly. "I'd like to examine you again this morning, if you're agreeable," Tom said, settling his bag on the cabinet and beginning to lay out his instruments. "I want to get a clearer picture of your condition now that you've had some rest and food." The examination was more thorough than the previous evening's quick assessment, with Tom taking careful measurements and making detailed notes about every aspect of Kate's condition. His manner remained professional and impersonal, but Kate found herself watching his face for clues about what he was discovering. Years of dealing with doctors who spoke around the truth rather than addressing it directly had taught her to read the subtle signs of concern or encouragement in their expressions. "Your condition is serious, as I told you yesterday," Tom said finally, settling back in his chair to review his notes. "However, I don't think it's quite as advanced as I initially feared. Your lungs are severely compromised, but there's no evidence of the disease spreading to other organs yet. That's encouraging." Kate felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, though she was afraid to trust it too completely. "What does that mean in practical terms, doctor?" "It means that with proper treatment, complete rest, and adequate nutrition, there's a genuine possibility of halting the progression of the disease," Tom replied. "I've seen patients with similar presentations make remarkable recoveries, though it requires months of careful management and absolute compliance with treatment protocols." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch that had become his sanctuary after leaving his previous life behind in Denver. "Miss Miller, I want to discuss my offer from yesterday in more detail, because I think it could benefit both of us significantly." Kate shifted in the bed, pulling the blanket higher around her shoulders despite the warmth of the morning sun. "I'm listening." "My medical practice here serves a large geographic area, with patients scattered across ranches and settlements that can be dozens of miles apart," Tom began. "I spend a significant amount of time traveling to see patients who can't make the journey to my clinic, which means I'm frequently away from the ranch for days at a time." He turned back to face her, his expression serious but not unkind. "What I need is someone who can maintain my patient records, handle correspondence with colleagues and medical suppliers, and assist with basic nursing duties when I'm treating patients here at the clinic. The work would be well within your capabilities, and it would allow you to remain productive while following the rest regimen necessary for your recovery." Kate considered this carefully, turning the proposal over in her mind and examining it from every angle she could think of. "Where would I live? What would the specific arrangements be?" "There's a small apartment above the clinic that was originally intended for a live-in assistant," Tom replied. "It has its own entrance, a sitting room, bedroom, and basic kitchen. Facilities. You'd take your meals with Maria and me in the main house, but you'd have complete privacy otherwise." The arrangement sounded almost too good to be true, which immediately made Kate suspicious. In her experience, offers that seemed generous usually came with hidden costs or expectations that weren't made clear until it was too late to refuse them gracefully. "Dr. Bennett, I appreciate your kindness, but I need to understand what you would expect from me beyond the work you've described," she said carefully. "I won't enter into any arrangement where the terms aren't completely clear from the beginning." Tom's expression darkened slightly, and for a moment Kate thought she had offended him. Then she realized that his anger wasn't directed at her but at whatever experiences had taught her to be so cautious about accepting help from others. "Miss Miller, let me be perfectly clear about something," he said, his voice taking on a firm edge. "I am offering you employment, nothing more and nothing less. You would be my assistant and patient, with all the professional boundaries that those relationships entail. Any man who would take advantage of a woman in your position would be beneath contempt, and I hope my character is such that you needn't worry about such concerns." The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but Kate had learned to be wary of trusting her own judgment when it came to reading men's intentions. "I'm sorry if I offended you, doctor, but surely you can understand why a woman in my circumstances might need to be cautious." Tom's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. You don't know me well enough to trust my word alone, and you shouldn't. Perhaps it would help if I told you something about my own circumstances, so you can better understand my motivations." He returned to his chair, settling back as if preparing to share something that didn't come easily to him. "I came to Copper Ridge 3 years ago after leaving a very successful practice in Denver. I was married then, to a woman named Elizabeth, who was everything I thought I wanted in a wife. Beautiful, accomplished, from a prominent family that approved of my career and social standing. Kate could hear the bitterness creeping into his voice, and she found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the story despite herself. Elizabeth became pregnant during our second year of marriage, and we were both delighted about it, Tom continued. She was young and healthy, and there was no reason to expect complications. But during her 7th month, she began experiencing symptoms that I should have recognized immediately. I was too close to the situation, too emotionally involved, to think clearly as a physician. He paused, staring down at his hands, and Kate could see the pain that still lived in the memory he was sharing. She developed preeclampsia, a condition that can be managed if caught early, but becomes life-threatening if allowed to progress. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. She went into convulsions during labor, and both she and the baby died within hours. "I'm so sorry," Kate whispered, understanding now the shadow she had glimpsed in his eyes the previous day. The medical community in Denver was very understanding about my failure to diagnose my own wife's condition, Tom said with bitter irony. They rallied around me, offered me sympathy and support, told me that it wasn't my fault, that these things sometimes happened, despite our best efforts. But I knew better. I knew that if I had been treating any other patient with the same symptoms, I would have recognized the condition immediately and taken steps to prevent the tragedy. He stood and walked to the cabinet where he kept his medical supplies, running his fingers along the labels of various bottles and instruments. I couldn't continue practicing in Denver after that. Every pregnant patient reminded me of Elizabeth. Every difficult case made me question my judgment. So I came here, to a place where I could start over, where I could help people who genuinely needed medical care and couldn't easily get it elsewhere. Kate was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the story he had shared and understanding now why he had been so determined to help her, despite her protests about payment. "You blame yourself for their deaths." "I know I'm responsible for their deaths," Tom corrected. "The question is whether that makes me a better doctor or a worse one. Whether the guilt makes me more careful and thorough, or whether it makes me doubt myself when decisiveness is what's needed." "And what have you concluded?" Kate asked softly. Tom turned back to face her, and she saw something in his expression that suggested he was still working out the answer to that question. "I think perhaps it makes me more human, more aware of my limitations and more determined not to let them cost anyone else their life." The conversation had taken on an intensity that surprised both of them, moving far beyond the professional discussion of employment arrangements they had intended to have. Kate found herself studying Tom's face, seeing past the competent physician to the man beneath, someone who carried his own burden of loss and regret. "Dr. Bennett, may I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Why are you really offering me this position? Is it because you need an assistant, or because you need to save someone you couldn't save before?" The question hung in the air between them, uncomfortable in its directness but necessary for both their sakes. Tom considered it carefully, recognizing the wisdom behind Kate's need to understand his motivations clearly. "Perhaps it's both," he admitted finally. "I do genuinely need assistance with my practice, and you do have the skills necessary to provide that assistance. But you're right that there's more to it than simple pragmatism. I suppose I see in your situation an opportunity to do something right, to use my skills and resources to help someone who deserves better than what life has given her so far." Kate nodded slowly, satisfied with his honesty, even if the answer was more complex than she might have preferred. "In that case, Dr. Bennett, I accept your offer. I'll work as your assistant in exchange for room, board, and medical treatment, with the understanding that the arrangement will continue as long as it benefits both of us." Tom felt a sense of relief that surprised him with its intensity. "Excellent. We'll start slowly, with simple tasks that won't tax your strength while you're recovering. Maria can help you move your things to the apartment this afternoon, and we'll begin your training tomorrow morning." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Maria appeared in the doorway with another tray, this one bearing tea and what looked like fresh biscuits with jam. "The Signora needs more food," she announced, setting the tray down with the same no-nonsense efficiency she brought to everything else. "Maria has appointed herself in charge of your recovery," Tom explained with a small smile. "I suggest you don't try to argue with her about matters of nutrition. She's remarkably stubborn when she believes she's acting in someone's best interests." Kate found herself smiling as well, the first genuine smile she could remember producing in months. "I think I can manage to follow those particular doctor's orders." Part 4. The weight of responsibility the apartment above the clinic proved to be a revelation in comfort that Kate hadn't expected. Though small, it was furnished with obvious care and attention to detail. A comfortable sitting area near the windows provided natural light for reading and close work, while the bedroom contained a proper bed with a firm mattress and clean linens that smelled of lavender and sunshine. The tiny kitchen was equipped with everything necessary for preparing simple meals, though Tom had made it clear that she was expected to take her main meals in the house with him and Maria. Moving her few possessions from the single carpet bag took only minutes, leaving Kate standing in the middle of her new home, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had been a dying woman stranded at a train depot with nowhere to go and no hope of survival. Now she had shelter, employment, medical care, and something that felt dangerously close to a future worth contemplating. The emotional whiplash of such rapid change left her feeling unsteady in ways that had nothing to do with her physical condition. She settled into the chair by the window, looking out over the ranch spread before her and trying to process everything that had happened since her arrival in Copper Ridge. The logical part of her mind recognized that Dr. Bennett's offer was both generous and practical, a solution that addressed her immediate needs while providing him with assistance he genuinely required. But another part of her, the part that had learned through bitter experience to be suspicious of unexpected kindness, whispered warnings about the dangers of depending too heavily on the goodwill of others. A soft knock at the door interrupted her brooding, and Maria's voice called out asking permission to enter. Kate opened the door to find the housekeeper carrying fresh towels and a small bouquet of wildflowers that she arranged in a simple glass vase on the kitchen table. "El doctor, he wants you should rest today," Maria announced, smoothing the towels with practiced efficiency. "Tomorrow you start working, but today you get strong again." Kate nodded, though she wondered if a single day of rest could make much difference to a condition that had been developing for months. "Maria, may I ask you something? How long have you worked for Dr. Bennett?" "Since he comes here, 3 years now," Maria replied, pausing in her arranging to give Kate her full attention. "Before him, I worked for the old doctor who built this place. Dr. Miller, he was good man but very old when he sold to Dr. Bennett. What is Dr. Bennett like as an employer?" Kate asked, trying to sound casual while fishing for information that might help her understand the man she had just agreed to work for. Maria's expression softened with obvious affection. "He is good man, very fair, very kind. He never raises his voice, never says bad things when people make mistakes. But he is also very sad sometimes, very lonely. He works too much, thinks too much, doesn't laugh enough." The description matched Kate's own observations of the doctor, but she found herself curious about Maria's mention of his loneliness. "Does he ever have visitors? Friends from town or colleagues from his previous practice?" "Sometimes other doctors come for consultations about difficult cases," Maria said, shaking her head. "But no friends, no family. He keeps to himself mostly, except when patients need him. Then he will ride all night through snow and rain if someone is sick." Kate absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the complex man who had taken her in. a physician who had isolated himself after a personal tragedy, dedicating himself entirely to his work while avoiding the emotional connections that might make him vulnerable to further loss. It was a pattern she recognized, having employed similar strategies herself after various disappointments and betrayals. "The Signora should sleep now," Maria said firmly, clearly deciding that the conversation had gone on long enough. "El Doctor will check on you before dinner, and tomorrow you begin learning to help him with his work." Left alone again, Kate found herself too restless for sleep, despite her body's obvious need for rest. Instead, she spent the afternoon exploring her new quarters more thoroughly and organizing her few possessions in the drawers and wardrobe provided. The simple act of unpacking, even such meager belongings, felt symbolically important, a declaration that she intended to stay and make this arrangement work. As evening approached, she heard Tom's footsteps on the external staircase that led to her door. His knock was gentle but confident, the manner of someone accustomed to entering sick rooms and dealing with patients who might be sleeping or unwell. "Miss Miller? I thought I'd check on how you're settling in before dinner." Kate opened the door to find him standing on the small landing, his medical bag in hand and his expression professionally concerned. "I'm quite comfortable, thank you. This is far more space than I'm accustomed to having." Tom stepped inside at her invitation, his trained eye automatically assessing her appearance and demeanor for signs of improvement or deterioration. "You have more color in your cheeks than you did this morning," he observed. "The rest seems to be helping already." "Dr. Bennett, I want to be certain I understand my duties clearly before I begin tomorrow," Kate said, settling back into her chair while he remained standing near the door. "What exactly will you expect me to do?" Tom pulled a folded paper from his pocket, consulting what appeared to be a list he had prepared during the day. "Initially, very simple tasks that can be performed while sitting. I'd like you to organize my patient files, which have become somewhat chaotic over the past year. Many of them need to be rewritten more legibly, and I'd like to establish a better system for tracking treatment outcomes and medication schedules." He moved closer to the window, looking out at the gathering dusk while he continued his explanation. "I also receive regular correspondence from medical colleagues and suppliers that requires responses. My handwriting is adequate for medical notes but less suitable for formal letters, and I'm afraid my spelling and grammar could use improvement." Kate nodded, recognizing tasks that were well within her capabilities and wouldn't require the kind of physical exertion that might worsen her condition. "That sounds manageable. What about the nursing duties you mentioned?" "Very basic assistance during examinations," Tom replied. "Handing me instruments, helping patients position themselves comfortably, maintaining supplies and ensuring equipment is clean and ready for use. Nothing that would require medical training or expose you to significant physical demands." The list of responsibilities seemed reasonable, even modest given the generous terms of the arrangement. Kate found herself wondering again about Tom's motivations, whether he was being entirely honest about his need for assistance, or if he was creating work to justify helping her. "Dr. Bennett, are you certain you're not simply inventing duties to provide me with employment?" she asked directly. "Because if you are, I'd prefer to know so I can find some other way to repay your kindness." Tom turned from the window to face her, his expression serious but not offended by her directness. "Miss Miller, let me show you something that might address your concerns." He left the apartment briefly, returning with a wooden crate filled with papers, folders, and what appeared to be several months' worth of unopened correspondence. Setting the crate on the small table, he gestured for Kate to examine its contents. "This represents approximately 6 months of patient files that need to be properly organized and filed," he said. "And this stack contains letters from colleagues, supply companies, and medical journals that I haven't had time to answer appropriately." Kate rifled through the papers, immediately recognizing the scope of the organizational challenge they represented. Tom's medical notes were thorough but often hastily written, with patient information scattered across multiple loose papers rather than compiled in systematic files. The correspondence ranged from routine supply orders to requests for consultation. On complex cases, many of which appeared to be weeks overdue for responses. "I see what you mean," she said, looking up at him with new understanding. "You really do need help with this. I'm an adequate physician, but I'm a poor administrator." Tom admitted, "I tend to focus entirely on the medical aspects of my practice, while neglecting the record-keeping and business correspondence that are equally important for serving my patients effectively." Kate pulled one of the patient files from the crate, studying Tom's notes and beginning to envision how the information might be better organized and presented. "I think I can help with this. In fact, I think I might enjoy the work." "Excellent. We'll start with just a few hours each morning, building up your stamina gradually as your health improves." Tom gathered up the papers, preparing to return them to the clinic for the following day's work. "I should let you rest now. Maria will bring your dinner shortly, and I'll see you tomorrow morning to begin your training." As he prepared to leave, Kate found herself compelled to address something that had been troubling her throughout the day. "Dr. Bennett, I want you to know that I understand the risks you're taking by employing someone with my condition. If other people in town object to having a consumptive working in a medical clinic, I'll understand if you need to reconsider the arrangement." Tom paused in the doorway, turning back to face her with an expression that suggested he had been expecting this concern. "Miss Miller, tuberculosis is not transmitted through casual contact or shared air in well-ventilated spaces. As long as you're careful about hygiene and avoid direct contact with patients during active coughing episodes, there's minimal risk to others." "But people don't always understand medical facts," Kate persisted. "They may be afraid, regardless of the actual risk." "That's true," Tom acknowledged. "But I'm not in the habit of allowing other people's ignorance to dictate my medical decisions. If anyone objects to your presence here, they're welcome to seek medical care elsewhere." The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but Kate couldn't shake the feeling that she was placing him in a difficult position that might ultimately cost him patience or social standing in the community. "I don't want to cause problems for your practice. Miss Miller, let me worry about my practice," Tom said firmly. "Your only concern should be following your treatment regimen and learning your new duties. Everything else is my responsibility to manage." After he left, Kate sat by the window watching the last light fade from the sky and thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. For months, she had been preparing herself for death, accepting it as the inevitable conclusion to a life that had offered few pleasures and many disappointments. Now suddenly, she found herself planning for a future that extended beyond mere survival, contemplating work that might provide satisfaction and purpose rather than just the means to postpone starvation. The change was both exhilarating and terrifying, offering hope while simultaneously raising the stakes of potential failure. If this arrangement didn't work out, if her health deteriorated further, or if Tom decided she wasn't suitable for the position, she would be back where she started, but with the added burden of having glimpsed what a different kind of life might look like. Maria's arrival with dinner interrupted her increasingly anxious thoughts, bringing not just food but also a sense of normalcy and routine that Kate found surprisingly comforting. The meal was simple but nourishing, prepared with the same care and attention that characterized everything else about her new circumstances. "Manana, you start working," Maria said as she collected the empty dishes. "You will do good work, help the doctor very much. He needs someone to care about his practice the way he cares about his patients. I hope I can live up to his expectations." Kate replied, voicing the concern that had been growing stronger throughout the day. Maria fixed her with a direct look that seemed to see right through to her deepest fears. "The doctor, he is very smart about people. He would not offer you this work if he did not believe you could do it well. You must trust his judgment, and you must trust yourself." Part 5. The first test. Kate woke before dawn on her first official day of employment, her body tense with anticipation and worry about the challenges ahead. The morning air carried the crisp promise of another clear day, and through her bedroom window she could see Tom already moving around the main yard, beginning the daily routines that kept his ranch functioning. Even at this early hour, he moved with the purposeful energy of someone who found satisfaction in physical work. She dressed carefully in her most professional-looking dress, a dark blue garment that had seen better days, but was still presentable and appropriate for office work. The mirror above her small dresser reflected a woman who looked healthier than she had in months, though still obviously marked by illness. The rest and regular meals were already making a difference, but she knew it would be weeks before she regained anything approaching normal strength and vitality. Maria had left a breakfast tray outside her door, along with a note explaining that the doctor preferred to begin work early when possible, particularly on days when he expected to receive patients at the clinic. Kate ate mechanically, her stomach tight with nervousness about proving herself capable of the responsibilities she had accepted. The clinic smelled of carbolic acid and the peculiar mixture of medicinal odors that seemed to permeate all medical facilities. Tom was already at work when she arrived, laying out instruments for what appeared to be a scheduled examination and reviewing notes from a thick patient file. He looked up as she entered, offering a brief smile that seemed designed to put her at ease. The morning light streamed through the clinic windows as Kate settled at the desk Tom had cleared for her use. The wooden surface was scarred from years of service, its surface marked by ink stains and the circular impressions left by countless coffee cups and medical instruments. Despite its worn appearance, someone had taken care to clean it thoroughly and provide her with everything she might need: fresh paper, several bottles of ink, an assortment of pens, and a stack of ledger books bound in dark leather. Tom had explained the filing system he wanted to implement, though calling it a system was perhaps overly generous. His current method appeared to involve stuffing patient notes into whatever container was convenient at the time, with some records stored in wooden boxes, others scattered across his desk, and still more tucked between the pages of medical texts. The challenge of bringing order to this chaos was daunting, but Kate found herself energized by the prospect of creating something useful from the confusion. "I should warn you that my handwriting becomes increasingly illegible when I'm treating emergency cases," Tom said, pulling a stack of files from one of the boxes and setting them before her. "If you encounter anything you can't decipher, please don't hesitate to ask for clarification rather than guessing at my meaning." Kate picked up the first file, studying the cramped notes that chronicled a rancher's treatment for a broken arm. Tom's medical observations were thorough and showed evidence of considerable expertise, but his penmanship was indeed challenging to decode. Several times she had to hold pages up to the light, trying to distinguish between letters that looked nearly identical in his hurried script. "Dr. Bennett, this notation here," she said, pointing to a series of marks that could have been words or possibly just ink blots. "I'm afraid I can't make out what you've written." Tom leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she caught the scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "Ah, that says, patient shows signs of infection around the break site," he explained, unconsciously placing his hand on the back of her chair as he studied the page. "I was concerned about gangrene developing, though fortunately that didn't occur." The casual proximity didn't seem to affect Tom at all, but Kate found herself intensely aware of his presence. It had been so long since she had worked closely with anyone, particularly a man who treated her with professional respect rather than the mixture of pity and revulsion that had characterized most people's reactions to her condition in recent months. "I think I can work out a more systematic approach to organizing these records," Kate said, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. "If I group them by type of condition and date of treatment, with a separate index for patient names, it should be much easier to locate specific information when you need it." Tom straightened, nodding approvingly as he considered her suggestion. That sounds ideal. I've wasted considerable time searching through these papers when I need to reference previous treatments or check on medication schedules. A knock at the clinic door interrupted their conversation, followed by the entrance of a weather-beaten man in his 50s who moved with the careful gait of someone nursing a significant injury. Tom immediately shifted into his professional mode, greeting the patient with a warm but authoritative manner that Kate was beginning to recognize as characteristic of his medical practice. "Good morning, Walter. How's that shoulder feeling this week?" Walter Henley removed his hat, revealing graying hair that stood up in unruly tufts despite obvious efforts to smooth it down. His eyes flicked curiously toward Kate before focusing on Tom. "Better than it was, Doc, but still pretty stiff in the mornings. My wife sent along some of her apple butter as payment for today's visit. Please thank Mrs. Henley for me," Tom replied, gesturing for Walter to take a seat on the examination table. "I'd like to check your range of motion and see how the muscle tissue is healing." Kate watched discreetly as Tom conducted the examination, noting the gentle efficiency of his movements and the way he explained each step of the process to his patient. Walter had apparently injured his shoulder in a fall from his barn roof several weeks earlier, and Tom was monitoring his recovery to ensure no permanent damage resulted from the trauma. "Miss Miller, would you please hand me the bottle of liniment from the cabinet behind you?" Tom asked, not looking away from his examination of Walter's shoulder joint. Kate rose carefully, mindful of her own limitations, and located the requested bottle among the various medications stored in the glass-fronted cabinet. As she handed it to Tom, their fingers brushed briefly, and she noticed that his hands were warm and steady despite the cool morning air. "Walter, I want you to continue the exercises I showed you last week," Tom instructed as he applied the liniment to the injured area. "The stiffness you're experiencing is normal, but it's important to maintain mobility to prevent the joint from becoming permanently restricted." "Yes, sir, Doc. My wife's been making sure I do them twice a day." "Just like you said." Walter winced slightly as Tom manipulated his arm, testing the limits of movement. "She's a regular taskmaster when it comes to following doctor's orders." Tom smiled at this comment, clearly familiar with Mrs. Henley's reputation for ensuring compliance with medical instructions. "Your wife is wise to insist on proper treatment. I've seen too many patients who ignore rehabilitation exercises and end up with permanent disabilities that could have been prevented." As the examination concluded and Walter prepared to leave, Kate noticed the easy rapport between doctor and patient. There was mutual respect and genuine liking evident in their interaction, suggesting that Tom had built strong relationships within the community, despite his relatively recent arrival in Copper Ridge. "Who's the young lady, Doc?" Walter asked as he shrugged back into his jacket, the question asked with the casual curiosity of someone who had known Tom long enough to feel entitled to personal observations. "Miss Miller is my new assistant," Tom replied smoothly. "Should be helping me with patient records and correspondence." "Miss Miller, this is Walter Henley, one of our most reliable patients." Kate inclined her head politely, noting that Tom had offered no details about her background or circumstances. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Henley." Walter tipped his hat in her direction, his expression friendly but clearly curious about this unexpected addition to Tom's household. "Welcome to Copper Ridge, Miss Miller. We're always glad to have new folks join the community, especially ones with the sense to work for our doc here." After Walter's departure, Kate found herself wondering about the reception she would receive from other members of the community. Tom's acceptance and Maria's kindness had created a bubble of safety that she knew couldn't last indefinitely. Eventually, she would need to venture into town, interact with neighbors and shopkeepers, and face whatever judgment or suspicion her presence might generate. "You handled that very well," Tom observed, returning his attention to the patient files spread across Kate's desk. "Walter will undoubtedly spread word about your presence here, but his endorsement carries considerable weight in town. If he approves of you, Others are likely to follow his lead. Kate looked up from the notes she was transcribing, studying Tom's face for any sign that he shared her concerns about community reaction. "Are you worried about how people will respond to your employing someone with my condition?" Tom paused in his organization of medical supplies, considering her question with the thoughtful attention he seemed to give to all serious inquiries. "Some people may have concerns, yes. But I've found that most folks in Copper Ridge are fundamentally decent, and they judge people based on character rather than circumstances beyond their control. And if they're not as understanding as you hope?" Kate pressed, needing to know that he had considered the potential consequences of his decision. "Then they'll have to decide whether their prejudices are more important to them than access to competent medical care," Tom replied firmly. "I won't compromise my professional judgment to accommodate other people's irrational fears." The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but Kate couldn't shake the feeling that she was placing him in a potentially difficult position. Her experience had taught her that fear often overrode rational thought when it came to diseases like tuberculosis, and even well-meaning people sometimes reacted badly when confronted with something they didn't understand. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Maria, who appeared in the clinic doorway carrying a tea service and wearing an expression of maternal concern. "Time for morning tea," she announced, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "The Signora must not work too long without rest." Kate started to protest that she had barely begun her work for the day, but Maria fixed her with a look that suggested argument would be futile. Tom seemed familiar with his housekeeper's protective instincts, accepting the interruption with good-natured resignation. "Maria has appointed herself supervisor of your recovery regimen," he explained to Kate. "I've learned that it's easier to comply with her directives than to argue about them." "The doctor, he works too much and forgets to eat," Maria said, pouring tea into delicate china cups that seemed incongruously elegant in the utilitarian setting of the medical clinic. "Now he has someone to remind him of proper meals and rest periods." Kate sipped her tea gratefully, surprised by how much the brief break helped combat the fatigue that had been building despite her best efforts to ignore it. The work itself wasn't physically demanding, but her body was still recovering from months of inadequate nutrition and the constant stress of her deteriorating health condition. "I notice you've made significant progress already," Tom observed, reviewing the stack of files Kate had managed to organize during the morning hours. "Your handwriting is excellent, and you seem to have a good instinct for logical organization." "I enjoy this type of work," Kate replied, realizing as she spoke that it was true. "There's something satisfying about bringing order to confusion, about creating systems that make information easier to access and use." Tom nodded approvingly, clearly pleased with her response. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping for." Too many people see record keeping as a necessary evil rather than an important tool for improving patient care. As they worked together through the rest of the morning, Kate found herself increasingly comfortable with the rhythm of clinic life. Tom moved between administrative tasks and patient preparation with practiced efficiency, while she focused on the detailed work of transcribing and organizing his medical notes. When questions arose about his handwriting or medical terminology, he answered them patiently and thoroughly, never making her feel foolish for asking. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the clinic windows, where they could see a woman riding hard toward the ranch with what appeared to be a child seated in front of her. Even from a distance, the urgency of their approach was unmistakable, and Tom immediately began gathering supplies for what was clearly an emergency situation. "Miss Miller, I may need your assistance with this patient," he said, his voice taking on the focused intensity that Kate was learning to associate with serious medical situations. "Are you comfortable helping with an emergency examination?" Kate felt a flutter of nervousness, but she nodded without hesitation. "Tell me what you need me to do." The woman who burst through the clinic door was clearly distraught, her clothes disheveled and her face streaked with tears. She carried a boy who appeared to be perhaps 8 years old, his small body limp and unresponsive in her arms. Tom immediately directed her to the examination table, his movements quick but controlled as he began assessing the child's condition. "What happened, Mrs. Crawford?" Tom asked, his hands already checking the boy's pulse and breathing while his eyes scanned for obvious injuries. "He fell from the hayloft," the woman gasped, her voice choked with fear and exhaustion. "Landed on his head, and he won't wake up. I tried everything I could think of, but he just lies there like he's sleeping." Kate watched as Tom conducted a rapid but thorough examination, his trained hands checking for signs of skull fracture while monitoring the child's vital signs. The boy's breathing was shallow but regular, and his pulse seemed steady, but his lack of responsiveness was clearly cause for serious concern. "Miss Miller, I need you to light several lamps and position them around the examination table," Tom instructed, never taking his attention away from his young patient. "I need as much light as possible to properly examine his pupils and check for signs of brain injury." Kate moved quickly to comply, her own nervousness forgotten in the face of the child's obvious need for help. She had never assisted with a medical emergency before, but some instinct guided her movements as she positioned the lamps to provide optimal illumination for Tom's examination. "Mrs. Crawford, how long has he been unconscious?" Tom asked gently, lifting the boy's eyelids to examine his pupils with a small hand lens. "Maybe 2 hours now," the woman replied, wringing her hands as she watched Tom work. "I should have brought him sooner, but I kept thinking he might wake up on his own, and the ride here is so long." Tom's expression remained professionally calm, but Kate could see the concern in his eyes as he continued his examination. Head injuries in children were always serious, and the duration of unconsciousness suggested potential complications that would require careful monitoring and possibly intervention beyond what could be provided in a frontier clinic. "His pupils are responding to light, which is encouraging," Tom said, speaking to both the mother and Kate as he worked. "But I'm concerned about the possibility of bleeding inside his skull, which could cause pressure on his brain." "What does that mean?" Mrs. Crawford asked, her voice barely controlled. "Is my boy going to die?" Tom paused in his examination, looking directly at the frightened mother with the kind of steady compassion that Kate was learning was characteristic of his bedside manner. "It means we need to watch him very carefully over the next several hours. Head injuries can be unpredictable, but children often recover remarkably well from trauma that would be much more serious in adults." Kate found herself impressed by Tom's ability to provide honest information while offering hope and reassurance. He neither minimized the seriousness of the situation nor allowed fear to overwhelm the family's ability to participate in the child's care. "Miss Miller, would you please prepare a bed in the recovery room?" Tom requested, his attention returning to his patient. "We'll need to keep him here for observation until we can determine whether his condition is improving." As Kate hurried to prepare the recovery area, she reflected on how quickly her new position had evolved from simple clerical work to active participation in emergency medical care. The responsibility was intimidating, but she found herself energized by the sense of purpose it provided, the feeling that her actions might actually make a difference in someone's life. The afternoon passed in careful monitoring of the injured child, with Tom checking his responses every 15 minutes while Kate maintained detailed notes about his condition and vital signs. Mrs. Crawford remained at her son's bedside, alternately praying and talking to him in the hope that familiar voices might help bring him back to consciousness. As evening approached, the boy finally began showing signs of improvement. His eyelids fluttered, and he made small sounds that suggested returning awareness. Tom's relief was evident as he conducted another examination, finding improved reflexes and more normal responses to various stimuli. "He's going to be all right," Tom told the grateful mother, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a physician who had successfully navigated a dangerous situation. He should wake fully within the next few hours, though he'll probably have a severe headache and may feel confused for a while. Kate watched as Mrs. Crawford broke down in tears of relief, overwhelmed by the emotion she had been holding in check throughout the long hours of uncertainty. It was her first real glimpse of the profound impact that Tom's work had on the lives of his patients and their families, the way his skill and dedication could mean the difference between tragedy and recovery. "Miss Miller, you did excellent work today," Tom said quietly as they cleaned up the clinic after Mrs. Crawford and her son had departed for home. "You have good instincts for medical assistance, and you remained calm under pressure." Kate felt a flush of pride at his approval, recognizing that she had passed some kind of test she hadn't even known she was taking. "I found it less frightening than I expected," she admitted. "When someone needs help, you don't really have time to worry about your own concerns." Tom nodded thoughtfully, clearly recognizing something in her response that pleased him. That's exactly the right attitude for medical work. The ability to focus on the patient's needs rather than your own fears or discomfort is what separates good assistants from merely adequate ones. As they finished their work and prepared to close the clinic for the day, Kate reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short days. She had arrived in Copper Ridge expecting to die, and instead found herself participating in saving a child's life. The transformation was so dramatic that she sometimes felt as though she were living someone else's life, as though the real Katherine Miller was still dying slowly in a Boston boarding house while this stronger, more capable version was merely a pleasant dream. "Tomorrow we'll continue with the filing project," Tom said as they walked toward the main house for dinner. "But I think we should also discuss expanding your responsibilities to include more direct patient assistance. You clearly have an aptitude for medical work." Kate felt a stirring of something that might have been ambition, a emotion she had thought lost forever along with her health and prospects. "I'd like that very much," she said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "I think I might actually be good at it." As they entered the warm, welcoming kitchen where Maria was preparing their evening meal, Kate caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror hanging near the door. The woman looking back at her still showed signs of illness and exhaustion, but there was something different in her expression, a spark of purpose and determination that had been absent for far too long. For the first time since leaving Boston, Kate allowed herself to believe that she might actually have a future worth living. A life that extended beyond mere survival to encompass meaning, contribution, and perhaps even happiness. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, opening up possibilities she had never dared to imagine during the dark months of her illness. Tom held the door for her, a simple gesture of courtesy that somehow felt significant, and as she passed close to him, she caught again that scent of soap and leather that was becoming familiar and oddly comforting. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles her health or circumstances might place in her path, she was no longer facing them alone. The ranch house welcomed them with warmth and the aroma of Maria's cooking, a haven of domestic tranquility that stood in stark contrast to the medical emergencies and life-or-death decisions that characterized their working hours. Kate was beginning to understand that this balance between professional purpose and personal comfort was exactly what had been missing from her life, the combination of meaningful work and genuine human connection that made survival worthwhile. As they settled around the dinner table, sharing the events of the day and planning for tomorrow's challenges, Kate felt herself truly relaxing for the first time in months. The constant tension that had characterized her existence during the worst period of her illness was finally beginning to ease, replaced by something that felt remarkably like contentment. She was still sick, still facing an uncertain future, still dependent on the kindness of a man she barely knew. But she was also useful, valued, and engaged in work that made a difference in other people's lives. It was more than she had dared hope for when she stepped off the train in Copper Ridge. and it was enough to build a future on, one careful day at a time. 3 months had passed since Kate's arrival in Copper Ridge, and the changing season brought with it a transformation she never could have imagined during those desperate first days. The autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter, painting the landscape in brilliant golds and deep reds that seemed to set the entire valley ablaze with color. From her window in the clinic, she could see Tom working with his cattle in the distance, his movements confident and purposeful as he prepared for the colder months ahead. Her own transformation had been equally dramatic, though more gradual in its development. The persistent cough that had plagued her for so many months had finally subsided to occasional episodes, and the color had returned to her cheeks along with a strength she had forgotten she possessed. The work in the clinic had become second nature, her fingers flying across correspondence while her mind automatically cataloged patient information and treatment schedules. Tom had been true to his word about expanding her responsibilities, gradually involving her in more complex medical procedures as her skills and confidence developed. She now assisted with everything from setting broken bones to delivering babies, her steady hands and calm demeanor making her an invaluable partner in his practice. The local community had accepted her presence with surprising warmth, particularly after word spread about her role in saving young Timothy Crawford's life during that first emergency. The morning brought an unusual visitor to the clinic, a well-dressed gentleman from Denver, whose expensive clothes and polished manner marked him as distinctly out of place in the frontier setting of Copper Ridge. Kate watched through the window as he dismounted from a hired horse, his movements careful and deliberate as someone unaccustomed to riding. Something about his presence filled her with unease, though she couldn't immediately identify the source of her discomfort. Tom emerged from the barn where he had been checking on supplies, his expression shifting from curious welcome to something more guarded as he recognized the visitor. Kate could see them talking in the yard, their conversation too distant for her to overhear, but intense enough to suggest serious business was being discussed. When Tom gestured toward the clinic, both men began walking in her direction. "Miss Miller, I'd like you to meet Dr. Harrison Walsh from Denver General Hospital," Tom said as they entered, his voice carefully neutral but carrying undertones she had learned to recognize as signs of tension. "Dr. Walsh, this is Miss Katherine Miller, my assistant." Dr. Walsh removed his hat with practiced courtesy, but his eyes held the calculating assessment of someone evaluating a business proposition rather than making a social introduction. He was perhaps 10 years older than Tom, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from wielding authority in prestigious medical circles. "Miss Miller," he said with a polite nod before turning his attention immediately back to Tom. "Thomas, I must say this setup is quite impressive for such a remote location. Your reputation for innovation has reached Denver, along with some interesting reports about your treatment methodologies." Kate felt increasingly uncomfortable with the visitor's presence, sensing undercurrents in the conversation that she didn't fully understand. Tom's posture had grown more rigid, and she noticed that he positioned himself slightly between her and Dr. Walsh, a protective gesture that seemed to be unconscious but significant. "I wasn't aware that my practice had attracted attention from Denver," Tom replied carefully. "We're simply providing medical care to people who need it, using whatever methods prove most effective for frontier conditions." Dr. Walsh smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, Thomas, there's no need for false modesty. Your success rate with tuberculosis cases alone has been remarkable, particularly given the limited resources available in this environment. The hospital board has been discussing the possibility of documenting your techniques for broader application." The mention of tuberculosis made Kate's blood run cold, and she saw Tom's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She began to understand why his reaction to this visitor had been so guarded, why he seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "My treatment protocols are hardly revolutionary," Tom said. proper nutrition, adequate rest, clean air, and careful monitoring. The same approach is advocated by progressive physicians throughout the country. Ah, but that's where you're being modest again, Dr. Walsh continued, pulling a leather portfolio from his coat. I have reports here suggesting that your recovery RTEs exceed anything we've achieved in Denver, despite having access to the most modern facilities and equipment. There must be something unique about your approach that accounts for such remarkable results. Kate realized with growing alarm that Dr. Walsh's attention was beginning to focus on her with uncomfortable intensity. His gaze moved from her face to her hands, noting the healthy color of her skin and the obvious vitality that had replaced the desperate illness of just a few months earlier. This young lady wouldn't happen to be one of your success stories, would she? Dr. Walsh asked with the kind of professional curiosity that made Kate feel like a specimen being examined under a microscope. I can see signs of previous respiratory illness, but her current condition appears remarkably robust. Tom stepped forward slightly, his protective instinct now clearly evident. Miss Miller's medical history is confidential, as is that of all my patients. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining professional discretion. Dr. Walsh's smile widened, but there was something predatory about the expression that made Kate want to retreat from the room entirely. Of course, but surely you can appreciate the scientific value of documenting successful treatment outcomes? The medical community has much to learn from your work here. What exactly are you proposing, Harrison? Tom asked bluntly, clearly tired of the diplomatic maneuvering. Dr. Walsh opened his portfolio and withdrew several official-looking documents. The hospital board is prepared to offer you a position as Chief of Respiratory Medicine with a substantial salary increase and access to research facilities that would allow you to expand your work significantly. We're also prepared to provide funding for detailed case studies of your most successful patients. Kate felt the room spinning slightly. As the implications of the offer became clear, Dr. Walsh wasn't just interested in Tom's medical techniques. He wanted to study her, to turn her recovery into a research project that would advance his own career and the hospital's reputation. The thought of becoming a medical curiosity, of having her most private struggles documented and dissected for academic purposes, filled her with horror. That's a generous offer, Tom said carefully, but I'm quite satisfied with my current situation. I have patients here who depend on my services, and I have no desire to return to hospital politics and administrative constraints. Dr. Walsh's expression hardened slightly, revealing the steel beneath his polished exterior. Thomas, let me be frank with you. The medical establishment in Denver is aware of your unconventional situation here. Your employment of a known consumptive as a medical assistant has raised concerns about professional judgment and patient safety. Kate felt the blood drain from her face as the real purpose of Dr. Walsh's visit became clear. This wasn't just a recruitment attempt. It was a form of professional blackmail designed to force Tom's compliance with the Denver medical establishment's wishes. Those concerns are based on ignorance and prejudice rather than medical fact, Tom replied, his voice taking on a dangerous edge that Kate had never heard before. Miss Miller poses no risk to patients when proper precautions are observed, and her assistance has significantly improved the quality of care I'm able to provide. Nevertheless, the perception exists, and perception often matters more than reality in professional circles, Dr. Walsh continued smoothly. Your reputation could suffer permanent damage if these concerns were to become more widely known. However, a position in Denver would remove you from such scrutiny, while allowing you to continue your important work under more appropriate supervision. Kate could remain silent no longer. Dr. Walsh, are you threatening Dr. Bennett's practice because he chose to help someone others had written off as hopeless? Dr. Walsh turned to her with raised eyebrows, clearly surprised that she had spoken. Miss Miller, I'm simply pointing out the realities of professional life. Dr. Bennett's talents are being wasted in this remote location, and his association with questionable practices could damage a promising career. Questionable practices? Kate's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. He saved my life when everyone else had given up hope. He's provided medical care to dozens of families who would otherwise have no access to professional treatment. If that's questionable, then perhaps the question lies with those doing the questioning. Tom moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring despite the tension that filled the room. Miss Miller is correct, Harrison. If the Denver medical establishment views compassionate care and clinical innovation as problems to be corrected, then I have no interest in rejoining their ranks. Dr. Walsh's facade of polite professionalism finally slipped, revealing the frustration and anger beneath. Thomas, you're making a serious mistake. The Territorial Medical Board has the authority to review licenses when concerns about professional conduct are raised. Your isolation here won't protect you if formal complaints are filed. Then file them, Tom said quietly, but with absolute conviction. I'll defend my practices and my decisions before any review board that cares to examine them. My patient outcomes speak for themselves, and I have nothing to hide about my treatment methods or my choice of assistant. Kate felt a surge of emotion, so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Tom was willing to risk his career, his reputation, everything he had built, rather than abandon her to appease the prejudices of his professional colleagues. The sacrifice he was prepared to make humbled her and filled her with a fierce determination to prove worthy of such loyalty. Dr. Walsh gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements, his diplomatic mask completely discarded now. I hope you don't come to regret this decision, Thomas. The medical community has long memories, and second chances are rarely offered to those who reject reasonable opportunities. I'll take my chances, Tom replied, holding the clinic door open in a clear indication that the meeting was over. Good day, Dr. Walsh. I trust you can find your way back to the main road. After the unwelcome visitor departed, silence settled over the clinic like a heavy blanket. Kate stared out the window, watching Dr. Walsh ride away while trying to process everything that had just occurred. The threat to Tom's career was real and serious, potentially devastating to everything he had built in Copper Ridge. I should leave, she said quietly, not turning away from the window. I can't be the reason your professional standing is threatened. You've done too much good here to risk it all for someone like me. Tom's hand settled gently on her shoulder, warm and steady despite the chaos that had just erupted around them. Kate, look at me. She turned reluctantly, expecting to see regret or doubt in his expression. Instead, she found the same steady determination that had characterized his care of her from the very beginning, unchanged by the threats or pressure from his former colleagues. I didn't save your life so that you could throw it away at the first sign of difficulty, he said firmly. Dr. Walsh and his colleagues represent everything that drove me away from Denver in the first place. Their medicine is about prestige and advancement rather than actually helping people who need care. But your career, your reputation, Kate protested, feeling tears threatening despite her efforts to remain composed. You could lose everything because of me. Tom's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch gentle but insistent as he forced her to meet his gaze. Kate, don't you understand? You are everything. This clinic, this practice, this life we've built together, it only matters because you're part of it. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that neither had dared to voice during the months of careful professional boundaries they had maintained. Kate searched his face, looking for any sign that the stress of Dr. Walsh's visit had prompted hasty declarations he didn't truly mean. Tom, you can't mean that, she whispered, afraid to trust the hope that was building in her chest. We barely know each other, and I'm still sick, still damaged. I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met, Tom replied, his voice rough with emotion. I know that you've made my work meaningful again, that you've given me A reason to care about building something lasting instead of just going through the motions of existence. Kate felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble, defensive barriers that had protected her through years of disappointment and betrayal. "Tom, I'm terrified. I don't know how to trust this, how to believe that someone could want me for myself rather than out of pity or obligation." "Then let me prove it to you," Tom said, his hand sliding down to capture hers. "Marry me, Kate. Not because you need saving, but because I need you. Because this practice needs you. Because this community has come to depend on you. Because I can't imagine facing the future without you beside me." The proposal was so unexpected, so different from the desperate arrangement that had brought her to Copper Ridge in the first place, that Kate could only stare at him in stunned silence. This wasn't about contracts or convenience or mutual desperation. This was about choice, about two people who had found something precious together and were willing to fight to protect it. "What about Dr. Walsh's threats?" she asked, needing to understand the full scope of what Tom was offering. "What if the medical board really does review your license?" Tom's smile was fierce and confident, the expression of a man who had found something worth fighting for. "Then we'll face it together. My practice here has created a documented record of successful treatments and satisfied patients. If they want to challenge my methods, they'll have to explain why innovation and compassion are considered professional flaws." Kate realized that her hands were shaking, not from illness or weakness, but from the overwhelming power of the emotions flooding through her. "Tom, are you certain? Once we take this step, there's no going back to the careful boundaries we've maintained." "I stopped wanting boundaries the day you organized my first patient file," Tom replied with a laugh that held equal parts joy and relief. "I stopped thinking of you as my patient the first time you handed me an instrument during surgery without being asked. I stopped believing in professional distance the night you stayed up with Mrs. Henderson during her difficult labor, holding her hand and giving her strength when I had nothing left to offer." The memories he recounted painted a picture of partnership that had developed so gradually Kate had barely noticed its evolution. She had become essential to his practice not just as an assistant, but as a true collaborator, someone whose insights and instincts complemented his medical training in ways that made them both more effective. "Yes," she said, the word emerging as barely more than a breath. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need rescuing, but because I choose this life, this work, this future we can build together." Tom's arms came around her then, holding her close, while being careful not to overwhelm her still recovering strength. Kate buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and leather that had become synonymous with safety and home. "We'll need to plan carefully," Tom said, his voice muffled against her hair. "I want our marriage to be a celebration, not a defensive reaction to outside pressure. I want the whole community to see that this is about love and partnership, not medical necessity or social obligation." Kate pulled back to look at him, seeing in his face the future she had never dared to imagine during those dark months in Boston. "Tom, I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you refused to let me give up hope. I just never believed I deserved to be loved in return." "You deserve everything good this world has to offer," Tom replied, his voice fierce with conviction. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the window, where they could see Maria returning from town with supplies, and what appeared to be several other riders accompanying her. As the group drew closer, Kate recognized several familiar faces from the community, people who had become patients and friends during her months in Copper Ridge. Word travels fast in a small town, Tom observed with amusement as they watched the impromptu gathering forming in the ranch yard. "I suspect Maria has been spreading news about Dr. Walsh's visit, and people are coming to show their support." Indeed, as they emerged from the clinic, they were greeted by a delegation of townspeople who had come to express their displeasure with outside interference in their medical care. Walter Henley served as spokesman, his weather-beaten face set in lines of stubborn determination. "Doc, we heard some fancy fellow from Denver was here trying to cause trouble," Walter said without preamble. "We just wanted you to know that nobody around here gives a damn what some city doctors think about how you run your practice." "That's right," added Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, her usual stern demeanor softened by genuine affection. "Miss Miller here has been a godsend to this community, helping folks when they're sick and keeping proper records so treatments don't get mixed up. Anyone who's got a problem with that can take their complaints elsewhere." Kate felt overwhelmed by the show of support, realizing that she had somehow managed to build a place for herself in this community that went far beyond her role as Tom's assistant. These people valued her not as a medical curiosity or object of pity, but as a contributing member of their society whose presence made their lives better. "Furthermore," continued James Whitmore with the authority of his position as unofficial town coordinator, "we've been talking among ourselves, and we think it's high time Dr. Bennett stopped living alone out here. A man needs a proper wife to help him with his work and make sure he doesn't wear himself out taking care of everyone else." Tom and Kate exchanged glances, amused by the community's transparent matchmaking efforts. "As it happens," Tom said with a grin, "Miss Miller has just agreed to become Mrs. Bennett, assuming you all approve of the arrangement." The cheer that rose from the assembled group was loud enough to startle the horses, and Kate found herself surrounded by congratulations and immediate offers to help with wedding preparations. The spontaneous celebration that erupted in the ranch yard felt like a benediction, a community's blessing on a union that represented hope and new beginnings for everyone involved. As the afternoon wore on and the impromptu party gradually dispersed, Kate stood on the clinic porch watching the sun set over the mountains that had become her home. Tom joined her, slipping his arm around her waist in a gesture that felt both new and completely natural. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, echoing the question she had posed to him months earlier during her first desperate night at the ranch. Kate leaned into his warmth, thinking about the journey that had brought her from the brink of death to this moment of perfect contentment. "Only that it took me so long to believe I deserved this kind of happiness. We have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time," Tom replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I intend to spend every day of it showing you exactly how precious you are." The first stars were beginning to appear in the clear mountain sky, pinpricks of light that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. Kate thought about the letter she would write to her few remaining friends in Boston, sharing the news of her recovery and marriage to a man who had seen past her illness to the person she could become with proper care and genuine love. She thought about the patients they would treat together, the lives they might save, the community they would help build in this beautiful, challenging frontier setting. She thought about the children they might have someday, sons and daughters who would grow up understanding that true strength came from helping others rather than advancing oneself. Most of all, she thought about the miracle of second chances, the way life sometimes offered opportunities for redemption and transformation when they were least expected. She had come to Copper Ridge prepared to die, and instead had found a reason to live that was richer and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined possible. Tom's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, their fingers intertwining with the comfortable ease of two people who had learned to trust in each other completely. Whatever challenges the future might bring, whatever threats Dr. Walsh or his colleagues might attempt to carry out, they would face them together as partners in every sense of the word. The ranch house glowed with lamplight behind them, Maria's cooking filling the air with the sense of home and belonging. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of people who needed their help. But tonight was for celebration, for gratitude, for the quiet joy of two hearts that had found their perfect match in the most unlikely of circumstances. Kate smiled as they turned to go inside, her hand secure in Tom's, her future bright with possibilities she was finally brave enough to embrace. The mail-order bride who had arrived dying and hopeless was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and was ready to build something beautiful with the man who had refused to give up on her when giving up would have been so much easier. The story that had begun with desperation and abandonment had transformed into something entirely different, a tale of healing and hope that would inspire the community of Copper Ridge for generations to come. And as they crossed the threshold into their shared future, Kate knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters were still to be written. 6 months later, the small church of Copper Ridge had never seen such a gathering. Every pew was filled with ranchers, shopkeepers, miners, and their families, all dressed in their finest clothes for what the community had declared the wedding of the decade. Wildflowers from the mountain meadows decorated the altar, their vibrant colors creating a tapestry of natural beauty that no expensive arrangements could have matched. The morning sun streamed through the simple windows, casting patterns of light and shadow across the wooden floors, where Kate would soon walk toward her future. In the small room behind the sanctuary, Kate stood before a cracked mirror that Maria had polished until it gleamed like crystal. Her wedding dress was a creation of her own making, fashioned from ivory silk that Tom had ordered specially from Denver, despite her protests about the expense. The hours she had spent on the intricate beadwork and delicate lace trim had been a meditation of sorts, each stitch a small prayer of gratitude for the life that had opened before her like an unexpected gift. The woman reflected in the glass bore little resemblance to the dying creature who had stumbled off the train those many months ago. Her cheeks held the healthy glow of someone who ate regular meals and slept peacefully each night. Her dark hair, now lustrous and thick, was arranged in an elegant style that Mrs. Patterson had insisted on creating personally. But the greatest change was in her eyes, which now held the quiet confidence of someone who knew her own worth and had found her place in the world. Maria fussed around her like a mother hen, adjusting the fall of her skirt and making sure every detail was perfect. The older woman had thrown herself into wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, determined that her beloved doctor and his bride would have a celebration worthy of their love story. "Signora, you look like an angel," Maria pronounced, stepping back to survey her handiwork with satisfaction. "El doctor, he will forget how to breathe when he sees you walking down that aisle." Kate smiled at the endearment, still touched by how naturally Maria had begun addressing her, with the respectful title reserved for married women. The community had already accepted their union as inevitable, treating Kate as Tom's wife in all but legal formality for weeks before the actual ceremony. A gentle knock interrupted their preparations, and Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a small bouquet of mountain laurel and baby's breath. "From Dr. Bennett," she announced with a smile that transformed her usually stern features. "He said to tell you that these reminded him of the day he first saw you smile." Kate accepted the flowers with trembling hands, remembering that moment when she had realized she might actually survive, might actually have something to smile about again. The gesture was so perfectly Tom, thoughtful and deeply personal rather than grand or showy. "The gentlemen are getting restless," Mrs. Patterson continued, smoothing her own carefully arranged hair. "I believe Dr. Bennett is beginning to worry that you might change your mind and run back to Boston." The idea was so absurd that Kate laughed aloud, a sound of pure joy that seemed to fill the small room with lightness. "I think he knows better than that by now. I've put too much work into organizing his patient files to abandon them now." Maria chuckled at this practical observation, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears of happiness. She had watched the gradual transformation of both her employer and his intended bride, seeing how they had healed each other in ways that went far beyond the physical recovery from illness. The sound of the church organ beginning the processional hymn signaled that the moment had finally arrived. Kate took a deep breath, centering herself for the walk that would carry her from her old life into her new one. There was no father to escort her, no family to witness this milestone, but she felt supported by the entire community that had embraced her as one of their own. As she stepped into the sanctuary, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the assembled guests. Kate moved slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Tom's face at the altar. He stood straight and handsome in his best suit, his usually unruly hair carefully combed for the occasion. But it was the expression in his eyes that made her breath catch, a look of wonder and gratitude that mirrored her own feelings exactly. Beside him stood James Whitmore, his best man, the older gentleman beaming with the pride of someone who felt personally responsible for bringing the couple together. The minister, an elderly man who had served the community for decades, waited with the patient dignity of someone who had presided over countless ceremonies of joy and sorrow. As Kate reached the altar and placed her hand in Tom's outstretched palm, she felt the last of her fears and doubts slip away like autumn leaves in a strong wind. This was right. This was real. This was the future she had never dared to dream might be possible. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying easily through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas Bennett and Katherine Miller in holy matrimony. This couple comes before us having already demonstrated the qualities that make a marriage strong: mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of love that grows stronger through trial and adversity." Kate listened to the familiar words, but her attention was focused on Tom's face, seeing in his expression the same amazement that she felt at finding themselves here, together, surrounded by people who cared about their happiness. When the time came for their vows, Tom spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion that colored his words. "Kate, when I found you at the train station, I thought I was saving your life. I didn't realize that you were going to save mine. You've given me purpose beyond my work, hope beyond my past failures, and love beyond anything I thought I deserved. I promise to cherish you not as someone who needs protecting, but as the strong, capable woman you've proven yourself to be. I promise to be your partner in all things, your companion through whatever challenges may come, and your devoted husband for all the days of our lives." Kate felt tears slip down her cheeks as she spoke her own vows, words she had crafted during the quiet evening hours when she allowed herself to truly believe this day would come. "Tom, you saw me when I couldn't see myself, believed in me when I had given up hope, and loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You didn't just save my life, you showed me that my life was worth saving. I promise to stand beside you in your work, to support your dreams, and to remind you every day that the man you are is exactly the man I choose to love. I promise to be your wife, your partner, and your dearest friend for all the years we're blessed to share." The exchange of rings was simple but meaningful, the gold bands catching the sunlight as they were placed with careful reverence on trembling fingers. Kate's ring had been her grandmother's, the only thing of value she had brought from Boston, while Tom's was newly made by the local blacksmith according to Kate's specifications. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," the minister pronounced with satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Tom, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle but thorough, a public declaration of private feeling that caused the assembled guests to burst into spontaneous applause. Kate felt herself lifted off her feet as Tom spun her on both of them, laughing with the pure joy of the moment. The celebration that followed transformed the church social hall into a scene of frontier festivity. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in the community, from Maria's famous tamales to Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning apple pies. A fiddler had been imported from the county seat, and soon the hall echoed with music and dancing that would continue well into the evening hours. Kate found herself passed from partner to partner as every man in attendance claimed to dance with the bride, each offering congratulations and expressions of welcome to the community. She danced with Walter Henley, who told her with gruff affection that she was the best thing that had happened to their doctor since his arrival in Copper Ridge. She danced with young Timothy Crawford, now fully recovered from his head injury, and proud to partner the woman who had helped save his life. But the dance she treasured most was the waltz she shared with Tom as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in golden light. They moved together with the natural rhythm of two people who had learned to anticipate each other's needs, their steps perfectly synchronized despite having never danced together before this day. "Any regrets, Mrs. Bennet?" Tom asked softly, using her new name for the first time with obvious pleasure. Kate smiled up at him, seeing reflected in his face the same wonder she felt at the transformation of their circumstances. "Only that we waited so long to admit what was obvious to everyone else months ago. I needed time to be certain you were choosing me, not just accepting the only option available," Tom replied, spinning her gracefully around a cluster of other dancing couples. "I needed to know that when you said yes, it was because you truly wanted to be my wife, not because you felt obligated by gratitude." "And now you know?" Kate asked, though she could see the answer in his expression. "Now I know that you chose me the same day I chose you," Tom said, pulling her closer as the music swelled around them. "The day you decided to organize my patient files instead of just sitting quietly in the corner being grateful for charity. The day you showed me that you weren't looking for rescue, but for partnership." As the celebration continued around them, Kate reflected on the unlikely series of events that had brought her to this moment. Samuel Crawford's death, which had seemed like the final catastrophe in a life full of disappointments, had actually been the catalyst that allowed her to find her true place in the world. Tom's decision to help a dying stranger had grown into something neither of them could have anticipated, a love story that had captured the imagination of an entire community. The gifts presented to the newlyweds reflected the practical nature of frontier life and the genuine affection of the givers. There were quilts stitched by the church ladies, kitchen implements from the merchants, and a beautifully carved medical cabinet from the local carpenter. But the gift that touched Kate most deeply was a leather-bound journal from Maria, inscribed with the words for recording the adventures of Dr. and Mrs. Bennet. As the evening wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Kate found quiet moments to speak with each guest, thanking them for their presence and their acceptance of her into their community. These people had become more than neighbors. They were the family she had never had, bound together by the shared challenges of frontier life and mutual support through difficulties. Mrs. Patterson approached as Kate was saying goodbye to the last of the departing guests, the older woman's usually stern demeanor softened by the emotion of the day. "Mrs. Bennet, I want you to know how proud we all are of what you've accomplished. You came here as one person and became someone entirely different through your own determination and strength." "I had help," Kate replied, glancing toward Tom, who was helping Maria clean up the remnants of the celebration. "More help than I ever thought I deserved." "That's what community means," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "We help each other become the best versions of ourselves. But the change has to come from within, and you've shown remarkable courage in rebuilding your life from nothing." As the last guests departed and the social hall returned to its normal quiet state, Kate and Tom walked hand in hand back to the ranch under a canopy of brilliant stars. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, but Kate felt warm and secure wrapped in Tom's coat and the certainty of their shared future. "I have something for you," Tom said as they approached the house, stopping beside the clinic where their partnership had first taken root. "A wedding gift that I hope will please you." He led her to the small building that had served as her introduction to medical work, opening the door to reveal a space that had been completely transformed. Where once there had been a simple examination room and basic office, now there was a proper medical suite with modern equipment and, most impressively, a small laboratory area equipped for basic research and testing. "Tom, this is incredible," Kate breathed, running her fingers over the gleaming surfaces of new microscopes and chemical analysis equipment. "This must have cost a fortune." "Consider it an investment in our future," Tom replied, watching her, faced with obvious pleasure at her reaction. "I want us to be partners in every aspect of our work, not just the administrative side. You have excellent instincts for medical diagnosis, and with proper training, you could become a skilled practitioner in your own right." The gift represented more than expensive equipment. It was a declaration of faith in her abilities and a commitment to their shared professional future. Kate realized that Tom was offering her the chance to become a true colleague rather than simply an assistant, to develop skills that would make her an equal partner in their medical practice. "There's something else," Tom continued, producing an official-looking document from his coat pocket. "I've been corresponding with the Territorial Medical Board about establishing an apprenticeship program for frontier medical assistants. You would be the first candidate, with the possibility of eventual certification as a practitioner qualified to handle routine cases independently." Kate stared at the papers, scarcely able to believe what she was reading. The formal apprenticeship would give her legal standing to practice medicine under Tom's supervision, a level of professional recognition that few women achieved even in established Eastern cities. "Tom, are you certain about this?" she asked, understanding the implications of such a bold step. "There will be those who object to a woman practicing medicine, especially one with my background." "Let them object," Tom said with the same fierce determination he had shown when facing Dr. Walsh's threats. "Medicine needs practitioners who understand suffering from personal experience, who can offer hope to patients others have written off as hopeless. Your recovery alone proves the value of compassionate, innovative treatment approaches." As they stood together in the transformed clinic, surrounded by the tools that would allow them to save lives and serve their community, Kate felt the final pieces of her new identity clicking into place. She was no longer the desperate woman who had answered Samuel Crawford's advertisement, no longer the dying patient who had arrived on Tom's doorstep. She was Katherine Bennett, wife, partner, and soon-to-be medical practitioner, with a future full of purpose and possibility. "I love you, Thomas Bennett," she said, stepping into his arms with the confidence of someone who knew her worth and had found her perfect match. "Thank you for seeing who I could become before I could see it myself." "I love you too, Katherine Bennett," Tom replied, holding her close as the moonlight streamed through the clinic windows. "Thank you for showing me that the best things in life come to those who refuse to give up hope." Outside, the wind whispered through the mountain pines, carrying with it the promise of seasons yet to come. There would be challenges ahead, patients to treat, lives to save, and a community to serve. There would be those who questioned their methods, their choices, their right to practice medicine according to their own convictions rather than conventional wisdom. But there would also be mornings filled with purpose, evenings of shared accomplishment, and the deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful together. There would be children to deliver, lives to save, and hope to offer to those who had lost faith in the possibility of recovery. As they walked toward their home, Kate reflected on the miracle of second chances and the power of love to transform even the most desperate circumstances into something beautiful. She had come to Copper Ridge prepared to die, and instead had found every reason to live. The mail-order bride who had answered one man's advertisement had found her true destiny in the arms of another, becoming not just a wife but a partner, healer, and beacon of hope for an entire community. The future stretched before them like an uncharted territory, full of possibilities they would explore together. And as they crossed the threshold of their shared home, Kate knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventures were still to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.